Number 10. The Tangaluma Shipwrecks. At first glance, a collection of 15 submerged boats off of the Brisbane, Australia coast resembles some sort of huge maritime crash. But this was no accident. Between 1963 and 1984, the Queensland, Australia government deliberately sunk the old dredging ships near Moortown Island to create a breakwall for small boats. Known as the Tangaluma wrecks, they became a haven for reef fish and other marine life, and coral is starting to form in and around the submerged vessels. Over 100 fish species are found at the site, which is also visited by dolphins and dugongs. They love it. The Tangaluma wrecks are becoming increasingly popular with snorkelers and scuba divers, as images on social media capture more people's attention than ever before. Situated in crystal clear tropical waters with high visibility, it's an ideal place for underwater exploration. The wrecks are sometimes visible above the water during low tide. Moortown Island is one of the few inhabited islands near Brisbane and is the world's third largest sand island. It lacks paved roads and is a haven for tourists, with the Tangaluma wrecks ranking as its top attraction. Would you like to see it for yourself? Number 9. Flamco Beach Tanks. A collection of rusting, graffiti-covered World War II-era tanks dotting the beach of Puerto Rico's Culebra Island look wildly out of place against the stunning Caribbean backdrop of turquoise water, clear skies, and white sand. But where did they come from? The American military began using Culebra Island in 1901 after Spain ceded Puerto Rico to the U.S. later that year. Then President Theodore Roosevelt allotted the island's public territory to the Navy. When no official base was ever established there, the site was used for bombing and weapons practice for decades. At some point, the Navy tried to evict locals from Culebra Island. They aggressively fought back through peaceful protests against the Navy's occupation of the island. The Navy conceded, and by 1975, the gear left behind, including several large tanks, was the only remaining evidence of a previous American military presence. Even after other items were cleared up, the tanks remained, and they're still there today, deteriorating in the sun and the salty ocean breeze. Number 8. Electric Car Cemetery. An image claiming to feature a vehicle graveyard in France that's filled with dozens of electric cars is currently going viral on social media. A caption on the post states that electric cars get tossed into lots because replacing their batteries is more expensive than replacing the cars themselves. The post also claims that the battery's chemicals saturate the ground, defeating the environmentally friendly concept that the cars are based on. The photo is being circulated mostly by conservatives who debate the concept of climate change. Reuters fact-checked the post and found out that the cars were not taken off the road for the alleged reason stated in the post. The vehicles were placed in a field after a contract between a local company and local authorities expired. It actually had nothing to do with their batteries. According to Reuters, the retired fleet was used as part of a car-sharing program called Autolib, which enabled members to use their cars whenever they needed. The program fell deeply into debt as it struggled with booking and parking issues, as well as competition from rideshare companies like Uber. When the contract ended, the company moved its 4,000 cars out of Paris and into a field south of the city. And, contrary to what the social media post claims, the cars are unlikely to sit there forever abandoned. They've been sold to 2 different companies, including one that specializes in reselling cars. Paul Awizari, who heads one of the companies, Atis Production, told Reuters that the cars are stored properly and are not at risk of polluting the soil beneath them because their batteries have been removed. But the rising popularity of electric cars does pose potential problems when it comes to battery disposal and recycling, as The Guardian reported in 2017. Each vehicle contains a half-ton lithium-ion battery, and the question of what to do with them when they're spent remains unanswered. Many lithium-ion batteries are not recycled, and this has environmental consequences. But the answer to this impending crisis remains unknown. Do you know anyone with an electric car? What are they going to do with their battery when it dies? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe button if you haven't already. Number 7. Luxury Cars. In 2010, car enthusiast websites like Top Speed and AutoGuide reported on the discovery of a Rolls-Royce Phantom sitting alongside a railroad in a Russian suburb. Outfitted with a Rolls-Royce Centurion body kit, the luxurious car looks conspicuously out of place, but it's clear by looking at the image that it had been sitting in place for quite a while. How the $450,000 car got there and why its owner abandoned it is a mystery. The Phantom's ownership was traced back to a buyer in Las Vegas, who then sold it to someone in Russia just a few years before it was found, seemingly left to rot. On top of being mysterious, the deserted Rolls-Royce makes for a sad sight in its worn-out state, covered in snow and sitting next to a woodpile. In most places, an abandoned luxury car is a rarity, but it's a somewhat common phenomenon in some places, including in India and Dubai. The problem was especially bad in Dubai, where an estimated 2,000 to 3,000 high-end vehicles were deserted every year during the global financial crisis that lasted from 2008 to 2010. Outdated laws meant that someone risked a lengthy jail sentence if they fell behind on car payments. Thankfully, the law has changed, but there's still an abundance of leftover vehicles from over the years. Last year, social media influencer Supercar Blondie uploaded shocking footage of a scrapyard filled with hundreds of dust-covered luxury cars in Dubai. Some appeared to have been in crashes, while others had no visible defects. Now that a vehicle owner no longer risks imprisonment by falling behind on their payments, it's likely that fewer people are leaving their cars behind. But in the event that this happens, a car owner has up to 6 months to pay a fine and retrieve their seized vehicle. Otherwise, it will be sold at auction for a much lower price than it's worth. Number 6. Lun Acronplan. Nicknamed the Caspian Sea Monster, the Lun-class Acronplan was a ground effect vehicle, meaning its wings generated lift and decreased aerodynamic drag while in close proximity to the ground. Designed in 1975, it served for the Soviet and Russian navies between 1987 and sometime during the late 90s. Only one Lun Acronplan was ever fully built, known as the MD-160, and it flew roughly 13 feet above the water's surface. It had a maximum cruising speed of 340 miles per hour and was equipped for anti-surface warfare with 6 missile launchers. Without a chassis, the Caspian Sea Monster was unable to travel on solid ground. Instead, it was stored on a dry floating dock that was built specifically for it. The dock was towed out into the bay and deliberately sunk, leaving the aircraft ready for use. The Acronplan remained self-sufficient for up to 5 days and was the world's heaviest aircraft during its time of service. Today, the MD-160 sits abandoned at a naval base in Caspisk, Russia. The only other planned Lun-class Acronplan was never completed. It was intended as a mobile hospital, but a cutoff of military funding left it 90% finished. Number 5. Sam Ratulangi PB1600. Officials in Myanmar were baffled in 2018 when a nearly 600-foot-long ghost ship appeared in the Gulf of Martaban. A few days after being spotted by fishermen, the vessel ran aground off the country's coast, enabling curious authorities to board and investigate. With no crew or cargo aboard, the only evidence of the ship's origin was the Indonesian flag it flew. 2 cables attached to the freighter's head indicated that it was being towed before it went adrift. The main traffic website provided a few additional clues, including that the ghost ship, named the Sam Ratulangi PB1600, was built in 2001. Its last recorded location was off the Taiwanese coast in 2009. The Myanmar Navy ultimately determined to a shipbreaking factory in Bangladesh when the crew abandoned it due to rough weather. After finding a tugboat about 50 miles off the country's coast, Navy personnel interviewed the 13 Indonesian crew members who were last aboard the Sam Ratulangi. They reportedly admitted to ditching the ship, and the investigation continued from there. Number 4. 1982 Ford Escort. In September 1991, police discovered an abandoned 1982 Ford Escort in DeKalb County, Alabama. 3 months later, they found the long-dead remains of a young man who had seemingly committed suicide nearby. They revisited the deserted vehicle in hopes of finding some clues and stumbled upon a birth certificate bearing the name Damon Hunter. But authorities soon learned that the document was forged, calling into question the car owner and deceased man's true identity. An investigation determined that someone going by the name of Damon Hunter had bought the Escort in Fargo, North Dakota, the previous month, and that the person stayed in a hotel while there. A threatening note found inside the vehicle indicated that the man had staged a robbery before his death. Police discovered that he had also called a local abbey and pleaded for financial help, telling the monks that he was considering committing a robbery and that the people he owed money to had assaulted him. Nobody at the abbey knew who the man was, though. In fact, to this day, authorities have not identified the deceased individual found near his abandoned Ford Escort. Number 3. Orient Express Train. Several years ago, Rotterdam-based photographer Brian Romijan spotted what appeared to be an abandoned Orient Express train in Belgium. He snapped some haunting photos of the old vehicle, which is a mere shadow of what it used to be when it operated as a luxury service a little over a half-century ago. The train has sat in the yard ever since it was taken out of service. Romijan, who discovered it while exploring the area, told the Express that seeing it was like stepping back in time. The Orient Express, originally called Express d'Orient, operated for 133 years, from 1883 to 2009. One of its most famous routes traveled between Istanbul and Paris during the 1930s. Over 75 years later, the final train ride under the Orient Express name ran between Strasbourg, France, and Vienna, Austria. One of the pride of Belgium's national railway, the deserted and decaying train is the last of its kind left. Some speculate that it may not have been an Orient Express train after all, as those routes never passed through Belgium. But the train is impressive in its own right, and it appears as though it could have been completed with the Orient Express in terms of luxury. Number 2. McBarge. Friendship 500, better known as the McBarge, was a floating McDonald's restaurant that was built for the 1986 World Exposition on Transportation and Communication in Vancouver, British Columbia. It became famous not only as a McDonald's on a boat, but for its conveyor belt system that delivered food to the front counter from a hidden kitchen. The McBarge closed for business following the 1986 Expo, and the boat failed to find a permanent home after that. In 1991, the new owners of the site, where it was moored, asked the barge owners to move it. The vessel was relocated to Barad Inlet, where it sat forgotten for the next decade. It was rediscovered following its appearance in the 2004 film Blade: Trinity. Developers Howard and Kathy Meekin bought the McBarge in 2010 with plans to convert it into the Deep Discovery Center, an imagined deep-sea museum dedicated to the history of the Pacific Ocean. The vision had yet to come to fruition though. In mid-2020, the Maple Ridge News revealed that the Meekins are still working on restoring the Friendship 500 to its former glory. For them, it's a bucket list item. And at last update, they were searching for the right location for the vessel. The couple has owned the barge for over 10 years now, and their plans for it have apparently changed. Instead of turning it into a museum, they hope to build it into a seafood restaurant. Number 1. MV Leoba Orlova. Built in Yugoslavia in 1976, the MV Leoba Orlova was an Antarctic cruise ship that remained in service until 2010. After that, the decommissioned vessel spent 2 years docked in St. John's in the Canadian province of Newfoundland. A company called Neptune International Shipping purchased the derelict ship in 2012 with the intention of breaking it up, but unfortunately, that never happened. While en route to the Dominican Republic to be scrapped in early 2013, the tow line pulling the MV Leoba Orlova broke, separating it from the tugboat amid rough seas. Crew members tried to reattach the ship, but they were no match against the 10-foot waves and 22-mile-per-hour winds. The vessel eventually drifted back to the waters off eastern Canada, prompting the government to task an offshore supply vessel with regaining control of it. After towing the MV Leoba Orlova back into international waters, the crew released it back into the open sea. Canadian authorities did not see it as their responsibility to salvage the ship and left the decision up to its owner. Eyewitness accounts of the free-floating ship were later reported off Ireland and Iceland. In early March of 2013, its emergency position indicating radio beacon was detected off the Kerry, Ireland's coast. These signals are only transmitted when the device comes into contact with water, indicating that the MV Leoba Orlova likely sank somewhere in the Atlantic, but there's a small chance that it's still out there, roaming international waters. Number 10. The Paradise Plane. There is a Boeing 737 aircraft abandoned seemingly in the middle of the jungle in Bali. It's not at an airport. It's not sitting in a plane graveyard. Instead, it's simply in an open field at the edge of the forest and near a limestone quarry. But the weirdest part is that nobody knows how in the world it got there. The plane just kind of showed up, parked itself, and then whoever was in the cockpit climbed down the stairs and simply walked away. It was like some kind of magic trick. Abracadabra. Poof. There's a plane. You would think that somebody would know something about a missing Boeing 737, but that's just not the case. There was some chit-chat a few years ago about turning the airplane into a hipster-like restaurant for tourists, But it never happened. There's a shabby hut by the plane that somebody may or may not have been living in, and absolutely nothing is being done with the aircraft. Still, it managed to turn into a tourist destination all on its own, as eager backpackers hunted out the mysterious aircraft, passing on the legend one brave and curious tourist at a time. Number 9. The Luftwaffa FW190. In 1989, a hiker discovered a German warplane from World War II hiding between the tall trees in a slight forest clearing just outside the city of St. Petersburg, Russia. The mysterious plane is a Focke-Wulf 190, also known as an FW190. It was used by the Germans in the Luftwaffe, their deadly air force that disseminated the Allies during wartime. This particular aircraft was fashioned in 1943, built in a factory in the German city of Bremen. But just how on earth did it end up in a Russian forest? Who flew this plane? According to War History Online, the pilot's name was Paul Ratz. He crashed the plane behind enemy lines in July of 1943 while carrying a huge 550-pound bomb to Leningrad, the former St. Petersburg. This particular siege was one of the biggest and bloodiest battles of World War II. Many hundreds of thousands died on both sides. He was shot down by artillery cannon fire and had to make an emergency landing. When he tried to get back to a more friendly territory, he was captured by the Russians and sent to a POW camp until 1949. He died 40 years later exactly, which was a very spooky coincidence, seeing as that was the year the plane was found. But he never knew about the recovery of the airplane. You know, since he was dead. This plane was retrieved by helicopter and fixed by restoration professionals in the United Kingdom. During the restoration process, it was found that the fuel lines were blocked, and there was a cloth rag shoved into the engine. The engine had only been put in a few short days before Ratz took off. Allied POWs frequently worked in German factories, so it is entirely possible that one of them sabotaged the engine. It's now the only FW190 that still functions. Number 8. The Caspian Sea Monster. The Caspian Sea Monster really does look like a sea monster. It looks like a gigantic aquatic beast resting on the western shores of the Caspian Sea. However, it's not a monster at all. It is a weird aircraft that had been abandoned for over 30 years. The aircraft was abandoned after the collapse of the Soviet Union in the 1990s and condemned to slowly rust at the Kaspiysk naval base. But just what is this bizarre-looking aircraft? It was an experimental hybrid between an airplane and a ship, designed to move over water without ever touching the water. The Russians called it Acronplan, and it's actually classified as a ship by the International Maritime Organization, despite the fact it flies and doesn't sail. It was designed for speed and stealth, with the capability of skimming across the surface of any body of water at a height of between 3 and 16 feet. This meant the aircraft could not be detected by radar. The Soviet Union loved its secrets during the Cold War and tried their best to create the most powerful version of an Acronplan, probably with nefarious intent. Their best product was the Caspian Sea Monster. However, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the program was scrapped and the plane was abandoned. It has since been retrieved as part of a plan to turn the Caspian Sea Monster into its very own tourist attraction. Still, it hasn't managed to make it off the shores of the Caspian Sea just yet. Number 7. The Plane in the Woods. Recently, people on Google Maps have been noticing a random Boeing 727 parked in the middle of the forest. Naturally, it raised a few questions. The aircraft can be seen from satellite images in a small patch of Oregon woodland, but it's not actually abandoned like most people think. It was acquired by an engineer named Bruce Campbell, who converted the aircraft into his own private home. Cool. It reportedly cost him $100,000, then another $100,000 just to get the airplane onto his property. Campbell then turned the interior of the plane into a modern home, complete with all the original equipment. It's like a spacious apartment, just over 1,000 square feet. It's very cozy and warm, and perfect for a single guy. And yes, the cockpit is still just like it was when Bruce purchased the aircraft. He even uses the original bathrooms. So, for all those urban explorers out there who want to discover the abandoned plane in the Oregon woods, maybe pump those brakes. Bruce doesn't really enjoy random people sneaking onto his property to take pictures of what is literally his house. Have you seen Bruce's plane on Google Earth? Do you think you would ever want to do a project like this? Let us know in the comment section down below. And if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 6. Abandoned DC in Iceland. In Iceland, there is part of an abandoned plane located on what is known as the Black Beach. The epic wreckage belongs to a United States Navy DC plane that crashed in the year 1973 after running out of fuel. Thankfully, Everyone that was on the plane survived the traumatic incident, including the pilot. However, it later came out that the pilot made a big error, causing the plane to go down. He switched to the wrong fuel tank. This caused the plane to run out of fuel to keep going. Even all these years later, the plane can be found in pieces on the beach, dangerously close to the sea. One of these reasons the abandoned plane is particularly special is the landscape it's surrounded by. The plane is a pale white, with United States Navy still visible on its hull. It stands out dramatically against the surreal landscape of black rock and sand. But getting there is a challenge, and it's forbidden to drive to the plane, even with four-wheel drive. There are also no roads or tracks to help you find the crash site, so you would really have to adventure to see this beauty. The site kind of looks like it's from a science fiction movie. It's truly a photographer's paradise. Number 5. Conzo Plane Crash. The Conzo crash site in British Columbia, Canada, is one of the most mysterious abandoned planes anywhere in the country. The only way to reach the destroyed aircraft is by hiking deep into the lush boreal forest on the coast of Vancouver Island. But how did the plane get there in the first place? It crashed shortly after takeoff back in February of 1945. The plane belonged to the Royal Canadian Air Force. It took off from Tofino, carrying 12 passengers and 880 pounds of bombs. Luckily, the bombs didn't explode upon impact and were quickly removed from the crash site. There definitely aren't bombs there any longer, and even though it sustained serious damage during the impact with the Earth, it remains still pretty much in one piece. The crash site was originally registered as an archaeological location and a point of historic interest. However, because the plane is so deep in the middle of the forest, it has been abandoned by Parks Canada. There are no signs, and the only way to get there is by bushwhacking through mud up to your waist. Are you bold enough to search for the Conzo plane crash? Let us know in the comments below. Number 4. Catalina Seaplane. In the hot and dry deserts of Saudi Arabia, there has been a seaplane abandoned in the middle of nowhere for over 50 years. It's a PBY-5A Catalina, a type of seaplane used by the military in the 1930s. It's in pretty rough shape today, stranded on a beach near the Gulf of Aqaba. The aircraft was purchased from the United States Navy by a man named Thomas Kendall, who converted the military aircraft into a luxury flying yacht for himself and his family to use. It was in 1960 when Kendall took his wife and their children on an adventure that ended in complete misery. They parked the aircraft in the exact same spot it is in today, with the intention of spending the night. However, the locals didn't really like the look of them. The following day when they woke up, they were greeted by men with machine guns. The aircraft was destroyed, the fuel tanks were blown apart, and Kendall and his family were captured by a local group of militias and handed over to the Saudi Arabian army as they thought they were Israeli commandos. Long story short, it was pretty obvious they weren't commandos, and the family was sent on their way without being harmed. It could have ended a lot worse for the family though. They were extremely lucky the men didn't just kill them, but they never did get their aircraft back, and it's still rotting in the middle of the desert. Number 3. Abandoned Albania. At the Kochov military base in Albania, there are all kinds of retired fighter aircrafts abandoned and neglected. Some of these planes included the legendary MiG-15, the MiG-19, and even the Shenyang J-5 and the Shenyang J-6. There are actually dozens of haunted-looking aircrafts here, just hiding in the creepy tunnels, seeming like they would never see the light of day or be flown again. The base was built in 1942, and it was still functioning just fine until in 1997 when the Albanian Civil War broke out and rebel fighters took control of the base. Today, MiG-15 aircrafts are mostly used by private owners as sports planes. Of course, unless you're North Korean, in which case you're still probably using the Chinese Shenyang J-6. The aircrafts at the base in Albania have been collecting dust for decades, but in 2004, a few of them were auctioned off to help Albania pay for modernizations to the base. NATO announced back in 2018 that it would invest roughly $58 million in the decrepit base, meaning the abandoned planes here will probably be shipped out soon to some kind of plane graveyard. Number 2. Biplane in the bushes. In the north of Poland, close to the sea, a damaged biplane from a bygone era was discovered simply abandoned in the bushes. The biplane is an Antonov An-2, which is one of the greatest mass-produced biplanes in the entire world. This amazing feat of aerial engineering used a single engine to fly through the sky, though it was developed not for war, but for agriculture and forestry. The Soviets were the ones to mass-produce the biplane, starting in the year 1946. It was extremely durable and able to land and take off from less than ideal runways. The biplane in the 40s was used for crop dusting, atmospheric sampling, and for fighting forest fires. There were lightly armed combat variants, though they weren't actually used very often. As for where the biplane in the bushes came from, it was probably forgotten by the Russians, though nobody can say when or why. It does look pretty cool though. And number 1, Russian Air Force Museum. The Central Air Force Museum in Russia is one of the weirdest aviation museums in the whole world. It's located near Moscow and houses one of the largest collections of aircrafts anywhere. It has 137 aircrafts on display, along with espionage equipment from the Cold War, interesting war instruments, and fascinating uniforms. However, the history behind the museum is more than a little odd. The museum was found in 1958, just after the local airbase shut down. At the time, there were only 6 airplanes and a few aircraft guns, mostly left over from the base. But the museum grew and grew, collecting more and more aircrafts. The main hall was pretty much destroyed by a mysterious fire in 2005, at which point it seemed like the museum and its displays could be abandoned. But repairs were done, and a new hangar was even built to bring in some more abandoned planes to be put on display, plus a new exhibition hall in 2020. Perhaps the most hilariously Russian thing about the museum is that up until 1999, it was closed to the outside public, because it displayed prototypes that the Russian government felt were classified. Leave it up to them to do something like this, right? Today, though, it's open to everybody. Number 10. Algae-covered warplane. There is a Douglas Dakota DC-3 that once flew 8,000 feet in the air, but is now currently residing abandoned 70 feet beneath the Mediterranean Sea. The plane is 65 feet long and was once used as a transport vehicle for Turkish paratroopers. It was deliberately sunk in 2009 to be used as a cool underwater diving experience for people with experience. But amazingly, it's still in pretty good shape today. The visibility underwater is often poor at the site, and divers have to go pretty deep before actually being able to see the plane. As you get closer and closer, it looms out of the darkness. It's almost completely covered in algae, but still looks like the propellers could begin spinning and the plane could take off at any minute. The plane used to carry soldiers. Now it's home to shrimp gobbies living in the dusty sand beneath its shadow, as well as barracudas who swim through the coral-encrusted propellers looking for food. Even the controls in the cockpit are still relatively intact. As for the history of the Douglas DC-3, it was originally built in the UK and took off in 1935 as one of the most successful models of its time. About 13,000 were built, with a military variant being used during the war to transport Allied forces. The very last DC-3 was built in 1945, but there are actually still some models flying in developing countries like Bolivia. Number 9. The Arizona Boneyard. The Boneyard is Arizona's very own airplane graveyard, filled with somewhere around 4,000 abandoned aircrafts. It's been described as creepy, fascinating, and even beautiful. The eerie site is located just outside Tucson, in the Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. The planes that have been abandoned here were either heavily damaged, discarded for being outdated, or simply no longer needed. The base was created back in the year 1946 to house the Boeing B-25 Superfortress and the Douglas C-47 Skytrain, but has since taken a multitude of airplanes. They are lined up in the dry desert, all day reflecting the hot Arizona sun. Some planes have been put in storage with the intention of possibly using them later on, while some are just there to be picked apart for extra pieces. In any case, considering there are thousands of planes here and the lack of rainfall and dry soil keep them from getting rusted, chances are the Boneyard will only acquire more forgotten planes as time goes on, until the aviation cemetery is filled to the brim with old, unusable aircraft. Would you like to check out this aircraft graveyard? Number 8. The Swamp Ghosts. In Papua New Guinea, there was a World War II bomber sitting forgotten and abandoned in the middle of the jungle. Papua New Guinea was used as an important battlefield between the Australians and the Japanese, and a critical piece of the land that the Allied forces did not want falling into Japanese hands. It's now riddled with the wreckage of warbirds, from crashed helicopters to planes, overgrown with vines and filled with creepy wild animals. The most impressive piece of wreckage in the country was definitely the bomber, the B-17E Flying Fortress, nicknamed the Swamp Ghost. It was on a bombing mission in early 1942 when it ran out of fuel and crashed into the Algae swamp around 8 miles from the northern coast. Ever since then, the plane has slowly been sinking into the soggy soil. At least it was until 2006, when a salvager from America took the abandoned aircraft apart piece by piece and then tried to take it home with him. The local people in Papua New Guinea were furious and stopped the crates full of abandoned bombers pieces from leaving the country. To this very day, the swamp ghost, which sat undisturbed in a literal swamp for 64 years, is stuck in a warehouse on the edge of town in Leh. And to be honest, it doesn't look like anyone wants the thing. It could sit in the warehouse for another 64 years before someone decides to actually do something with it. Number 7. Abandoned Boeing 707. There's an abandoned Boeing 707 at the Tegel Airport in Berlin, Germany. It's sitting at the edge of the runway, forgotten and disused. At first glance, it looks like an ordinary abandoned plane that is no longer in service. There's no smoke or fire damage, and it's completely intact. But dig a little deeper, and you'll find that the specific airplane was once involved in an insane international hijacking incident that involved at least 3 other aircrafts. The incident is known as the Dawson Fields hijackings. The plane itself was made for an Israeli national airline in 1961, but in September of 1970, it was flying from Amsterdam when it got hijacked in mid-air. At the same time, 3 other planes were hijacked in Europe as well. This 707 was hijacked by a pair from South America who were part of a revolutionary group. They boarded the plane armed with pistols and grenades. Luckily for everyone on board, there was an Israeli security guard on the plane. The security guard got into a firefight with the hijackers. A steward was injured by a stray bullet, and one of the hijackers was killed in the fighting. The other hijacker, still standing, tried to blow herself up with a grenade, only to have the brave passengers jump on her and prevent her from detonating it. She pulled the pin, but passengers held her hands together and replaced the pin, saving the plane and the lives of everyone on board. The flight was then diverted to London. It got moved around quite a bit and continued to be in service until the middle of the 1980s, when it was given to West Berlin. The plane was repainted but never saw any more action. It was eventually vandalized, forgotten, and moved to the edge of the airfield, where it is still abandoned today. Have you ever seen an abandoned plane? Did you go inside? Would you like to? Let us know in the comments section below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe button if you haven't already. Number 6. Russian cargo plane. There is a Russian aircraft from the Soviet era that has sat abandoned near the Barracuda Beach resort in Al-Quwain for the past 20 years. The mysterious cargo plane landed here 2 decades ago and never took off again. What's really strange is that nobody knows why the plane landed and didn't leave again. There are some theories though. Some say it was supposed to be converted into a restaurant or hotel. Some say it was supposed to be a roadside billboard, and others say one of the engines died and it just couldn't take off again. Then nobody wanted to pay the money to move it. The plane ended up being a popular skydiving spot for about 10 years until 2009. Today, it's slowly sinking into the sand and has become a hotspot for birds' nests and is only ever used as a venue for quirky art shows to entertain resort guests. Number 5. Long Marston Airfield Graveyard. The Long Marston Airfield Graveyard is another amazing place filled with derelict, abandoned planes. The airfield was built during the Second World War, though the abandoned planes here were deposited far after the fighting was over. There was once a small aviation museum, though that too closed long ago. Some of the planes here included an abandoned Gloucester Meteor, covered in graffiti, a Shackleton, which was used as a patrol aircraft in anti-submarine operations during the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and even a Percival Sea Prince. This last plane is standing at the gate of the airfield, almost like a security guard, with sharp shark teeth painted on its nose, perhaps meant to be menacing to ward away potential vandals from tagging it or stealing parts. Unfortunately, for urban explorers and fans of abandoned planes, there are currently plans in place to remove all the abandoned aircrafts and build thousands of houses on the empty piece of property. In just a few years, these amazing historical relics will probably be gone, and there will be condos standing in their place. It seems like a pretty sad fate for these planes, to be just left to rot after their years of faithful service. Would you like to check it out before it's gone forever? Number 4. Miss Piggy. Deep in the middle of nowhere, Canada, there's an abandoned plane known locally as Miss Piggy. Yeah, like the famous Muppet. She's a Curtiss C-46 Commando. an old twin-propeller cargo plane used widely by the U.S. military in World War II. On November 13, 1979, this particular plane crashed down while trying to land at the local Churchill Airport. Just before taking off, the pilot realized there was a problem with one of the engines and that they wouldn't get very far if they tried. Rather than risk the flight, they tried to turn around and land, but the landing turned into a crash and the plane was damaged way beyond repair. 3 of the crew members were injured, but survived, and the plane has remained in Churchill, a small town basically at the end of the world ever since. Number 3. The Soviet VVA-14. The Soviet VVA-14 was once thought to be a secret weapon that the Soviet Union could use against United States submarines. That didn't turn out to be the case though. It was supposed to be a vertical takeoff amphibious aircraft with a total of 14 engines. The idea was that it could take off from anywhere in the world without the need of a runway and hover just above the surface of the water. It would have been perfect for countering submarines. It seemed like a great idea. However, the aircraft never really took off. The project was canceled, and the only surviving prototype today sits abandoned in a dirty old field outside of Moscow in Russia. Only 2 prototypes were ever built, and only one took to the skies. The test flight was a total disaster. Then when the inventor of the machine, a Russian named Bartini, died in 1974, the project was totally abandoned. No one wanted to take the mantle. Bartini was a visionary with an unusual mind and character. It seemed he was ahead of his time, and some even called him an alien. He became famous mainly for his wild concepts and ideas, with only a few actually becoming reality. He definitely left his mark in Soviet aircraft building though. One of the vehicles, that was mostly intact, was dismantled, and the other was sent to the Central Air Force Museum near Moscow, but experienced problems with the delivery. The aircraft was looted by scavengers and badly damaged, then just abandoned in the field and hasn't been touched since. Number 2. World War II fighter plane. The incredible wreckage of a fighter plane from World War II that crashed off the coast of Wales back in 1942 was recently given a protective status by the government. The ghostly wreckage of the jet is only ever revealed when the ocean tide washes the sand off its rusted wings. The plane was first spotted in the 1970s and has been uncovered by experts twice since then, once in 2007 and again in 2014. It's a Lockheed P-38 Lightning fighter that is now buried under roughly 7 feet of sand, with only its front nose and the ends of its wings sometimes being visible. The protected status it just got was given by officials in the United Kingdom because they believe the plane holds historic significance, and they're right to believe that, as it is the very first legally designated military crash site to be protected in the UK. The plane was originally flown by the 24-year-old Second Lieutenant Robert F. Elliott, who crashed into the beach in September of 1942. Even though the pilot walked away from the crash without any serious injuries, he was reported missing several months later, and to this day has never been found. What do you think happened to Robert F. Elliott? Where did he go? Let us know what you think in the comments. And number 1, the Airplane Hotel. Deep in the lush rainforests of Costa Rica, right at the edge of the beautiful Manuel Antonio National Park, there is an abandoned 1965 Boeing 727 that has been turned into a luxury hotel. The plane was once used to transport tourists with South Africa Air and Avianca, 2 airlines. It is now a 2-bedroom suite that overlooks the beautiful vegetation, the beach, and the ocean, and the surrounding wildlife. Of course, there was a bit more to building the airplane hotel than just stuffing some rooms into its cargo hold. The airplane was actually transported to where it is now, in pieces from the San Jose airport. 5 massive trucks were needed to get the plane out of the resort. And while the transportation definitely had a negative ecological impact, the finished project is an exquisite example of flexible reuse. On its pedestal, 50 feet above the sand of the beach, it looks kind of like a model airplane. It's not exactly clear why it was abandoned in the first place. The plane is pretty old, so it was probably outdated and left to rot at the airport in Costa Rica before someone with a lot of money decided to turn it into a type of eco-lodge. In any case, if you've ever wanted to sleep in an abandoned airplane in style, you're going to need to book a ticket to Costa Rica and make your booking at the Airplane Hotel well in advance. Would you stay in the Airplane Hotel? Let us know in the comments below, and thanks for watching. If you haven't already, be sure to hit subscribe and come back soon for another amazing video. See you next time.